We've passed the halfway point on the toughest challenge Football Manager has to offer, the Pentagon Challenge. With the African, Asian and North American Cups already in our trophy cabinet, we now just need to tick off the Copa Libertadores and the UEFA Champions League before I can crown myself the greatest FM player of all time. Armed with my 4.5-star reputation and a Continental Pro license, I should be able to get an interview for any job in world football. So now I just need to pick the right one. But before that, if you're enjoying the series, please make sure you leave a nice big thumbs up on there to let YouTube know you're enjoying the series. We like views. And also, if you are new, don't forget, subscribe, turn your notifications on so you don't miss out on the rest of this series and, of course, the thousands of other Football Manager videos that are here on the channel. So for the first time, it's not immediately obvious which continent I should head to next. My days of working up through smaller clubs are behind me. I want a team that's already playing in their continent's top competition, and those jobs don't come along very often. There's a few jobs available in the top leagues in Brazil and Argentina, but they're all for teams in the bottom half of their tables. Meanwhile, in Europe, both the Lazio and Napoli jobs are available, but despite being historically quite big clubs, they're both only in the Europa League next year, so that's not really ideal. I think we can wait a little longer. And it was worth the wait because before too much longer, two big jobs at big clubs, both currently in their respective Champions Leagues, became available. Juventus in Italy and Gremio in Brazil. I applied for both and sat back and waited for the interviews. In terms of this save, I wasn't really bothered which one I ended up at. They're both big clubs that I should be able to complete the next stage of the challenge with, but from a personal perspective, I was definitely leaning towards Gremio, having managed Juventus relatively recently in non-league to legend. But basically, whichever job offer came first was going to be my new home. And it was Gremio who came in with the job offer. They finished third in the Brazilian league last season, which was enough for a Copa Libertadores spot. In fact, the top 7 in Brazil all qualify for it, so we shouldn't have any trouble getting into it each year. But they've had a slow start to this season and we're down in 12th place just before the halfway point of the season, 7 points behind Santos, who currently occupied 7th place and that final qualification spot. So we'd have some work to do and less money than we'd become used to do it, as they only offered me a £5 million transfer budget, much less than I'd been used to at Shimizu and Kansas City. But I was never going to turn down a team that had previously won the Copa Libertadores 3 times, so it's off to Brazil we go. The media think despite our poor start, we should still qualify for the Copa Libertadores, and as you'd expect from Brazil, we've got some talented players to work with, including right-back Carlos de Barros, who's wanted by both Barcelona and Real Madrid, and Marquinhos off of Arsenal's reserves in real life. There's loads of 5-star potential talent in the development centre too, so despite starting with a low budget, we should be able to get some financial wheeler dealing rolling, and some of that is likely to be taken out of my hands, as similar to Spain, it seems every player in Brazil has a release clause, and worryingly, some of them aren't very big, with De Barros, for example, having a £185 million domestic release fee, but only £12.75 million to foreign clubs. So I suspect I'm going to get punished for what I've been doing to Brazilian teams for years and lose a lot of my best players without being able to do anything about it. And we don't have to wait very long to test the theory either, because within just a couple of days of my arrival, the transfer window opened. We had just enough time before it did to win our first match 2-0 to start moving up the league, but my plan for this window now is to basically spend the summer reacting to whichever players leave and trying to replace them as best I can. The squad as it is should be strong enough to challenge for the title, but I suspect I'll never find out whether that judgment is right or not. So we settled down into a nice rhythm of winning most of our matches and climbing up the league table whilst waiting for the inevitable. And the first departure, as expected, was De Barros, who went to Arsenal for his £12.75 million release clause, and he was followed a few days later by Brazilian international centre-back Guilherme, who went to Brentford for his release clause of £11.5 million. The board only let me have 25% retained transfer revenue, so we couldn't go bonkers replacing them, but did spend a bit of money bringing in 30-year-old striker Saldana for £1.1 million, taking winger Emerson on loan, bringing in another old man striker in the shape of Luis Suarez, not that one, and Argentinian centre-back Gonzalo Escudero for £950,000. While all this was going on, we moved up to 8th in the league and knocked Ecuadorian side knocked Liga de Quito out of the Copa Libertadores 6-2 on aggregate in the second round before facing the much tougher prospect of Argentinian powerhouses Boca Juniors in the quarter-final. We won our home leg 1-0 thanks to a 72nd minute goal from centre-back Raul Gustavo, and for a brief minute I dreamed of winning my third Champions League in just over a year on 3 different continents, but Boca ruined that plan by comfortably taking care of us in the second leg with goals in the 18th and 77th minutes, securing a 2-0 win, 2-1 on aggregate, and knocking us out of the competition. So now our focus was on making sure we qualified for it again next year, whilst continuing to try and minimise transfer damage while the European transfer windows were still open. Not that there was much I could do to actually minimise that damage. They're release clauses. I can't do anything to stop it from happening. Seems very unfair being on this side of it. In the end, we only lost one more player we'd have rather kept before the window closed, with left back Cuabano joining Guilherme at Brentford for his £10 million release clause. We also moved on a couple of old guys and some fringe players and signed a South African. Unfortunately, not Luke Bartman. We tried, but he's way out of our price range now, playing for Al Khalij in Saudi Arabia. But we did head back to Cape Town, albeit City, not Spurs, for South African international right-back Leonard Khumalo for £325,000. South African bargains are my new favourite kind of bargains. They're so cheap. Another nice little unbeaten run later, including a lovely 5-0 win over Internacional, and with 5 games to go, we're just 1 point behind 7th place Atletico Mineiro, but secured our qualification for the Copa Sudamericana for next season. That's the South American version of the Europa League. But realistically, if we have to play in that, we'll be jumping ship, because that's a waste of time on this challenge, and we just need to keep winning to secure the top 7 spot and the Copa Libertadores for next year. And in the end, we did it in style, stretching our unbeaten run out to 11 matches, picking up a couple more big wins along the way, including a final day 6-1 thumping of Santos, and we ended up finishing in 5th place, comfortably securing our qualification and ensuring I'll be here at Gremio for at least 1 more year. And of course, as soon as the season was over, the vultures started circling again. This time, my old rivals from Saudi Arabia rather than the Premier League. Right-back Samuel went to Al Ettifaq for £6 million, and centre-back Gustavo Martins went to Al Riyadh for £10 million. With a squad that was already looking good, we didn't need to do loads to bring new players in, so we went out and spent big on a star player, bringing in Argentinian winger Santiago Hidalgo for a club record £9.5 million from Independiente, and bracing ourselves for the weird first half of the Brazilian league season. Because before the league starts up again in April, we've got 3 months of playing in the State Championship, which is a whole other league in its own right, that will also feature this season's Copa Libertadores campaign starting midway through. Our only real rivals for the State Championship are Internacional, and we played them first, drawing 1-1, meaning that the ultimate champions would be decided by which one of the two of us could come closest to winning every one of the remaining games. We had to go through 2 qualifying rounds to get to the group stage of the Copa Libertadores, but did that comfortably, beating Paraguayan team Cerro Porteño 15-0 over 2 legs and Belgrano of Argentina 6-3 on aggregate in the 3rd qualifying round. By the time we'd qualified for the group stages, we'd won every game in the State Championship since the first one, but so had Internacional, but we were more interested in our Copa Libertadores group that contained Flamengo, Atlético Nacional from Colombia, and Colo Colo from Chile. We play each of them twice, and the top 2 go through to the knockout rounds, so we were feeling pretty confident. So confident that we went out and splurged a load of the cash that we'd been accumulating on players to strengthen our squad, including 29-year-old defender Rafael Pontello from Flamengo for £4 million. With the youth setup we've got, I was more interested in buying players who improve us now. The youngsters can all develop from within the club and be sold on to keep a flow of transfer money coming in, but my plan was to build a stable, successful team out of the older players who'd never been quite good enough for the move to Europe, but who were as good as the up-and-coming youngsters currently. We ended up being the team that dropped points in the State Championship, drawing 0-0 with Juventud, with a rotated side between 2 Copa Libertadores group games. How many different ways have I said that word at this point, by the way? Those games being a 4-2 win over Flamengo that convinced me we'd win the group, and a 1-1 draw with Atlético Nacional that brought me back down to earth. But as with so many of these tournaments in the Americas, the league is really just a warm-up for the playoffs at the end. So we faced Juventud again over 2 legs in the the state championship semi-finals, this time beating them 4-1 on aggregate with a much less rotated team, either side of a 5-2 win over Colo Colo, and then faced Internacional in the final over 2 legs. They'd finished above us in the league stage, winning every match apart from the one they drew with us on the opening day, but we demonstrated how far we've come in just a few months with our new signings, beating them 4-1 in the first leg at home and then 5-2 away from home for the comfortable aggregate win, and we were state champions for the 48th time in our history. By this point, we were also top of our Copa Libertadores group with 7 points from our first 3 games, and having already played 19 competitive games this season, it was time for the league to start. But our focus was still on the Copa Libertadores. That's what we're here to win. So although our league form started slowly with just 4 points from our first 2 matches, we got a point away at Colo Colo and went into our 5th match with Flamengo, knowing that if the other result went our way, we'd both qualify regardless of the result. So despite getting beaten 4-2, we were through to the knockout round, albeit in 2nd place behind Flamengo. It was at this point that the Gremio board tried to tie me down to a new long-term contract, but with 18 months to run on my current deal, I had to back myself to win the big one before my current deal expired and turn down their contract to make sure I was nice and cheap for my next club to hire, either this season or next. With the distraction of the Copa Libertadores out of the way while we waited for the knockout rounds to begin, we got down to the business of winning league matches, and by the time the transfer window opened again in July, we were 11 points clear at the top of the table and into the semi-final of the Brazilian Cup, with 24-year-old striker Jonathan banging in loads of goals, along with Marquinhos and 26-year-old Jamaican striker Rosimir also playing at the top of their games, which meant despite our on-the-pitch success, summer would be spent trying to keep our best players at the club, with Marquinhos the first to leave, joining Lille for his £12.75 million release fee. And although he was joined by a few of the older fringe players who dropped down the pecking order, we actually managed to make it to the end of the summer window with no further damage being done, and a new goalkeeper in the shape of Lucao for £4.9 million to try and help us collect some more silverware. The second round of the Copa Libertadores put us up against Sporting Cristal from Peru, who we comfortably beat 4-1 on aggregate to set up a quarter-final with Argentina's River Plate. Having been knocked out by Argentinian opposition in this round last year, we weren't over the moon with the draw, and things didn't look great when River took the lead in the first leg at our ground midway through the first half. But we were saved in the second half by 2 of our old men that we signed exactly for this purpose, with Rafael Pontello grabbing the equaliser just after the hour before 33-year-old substitute Saldana grabbed 2 late goals to flatter us a little bit and set us up nicely for the second leg. And can we just take a moment to appreciate Saldana, who we signed for just £1.5 million. Those 2 goals were his 37th and 38th of the season in all competitions. So far, that is as well. So far. We started much better in the second leg, with Pontello opening the scoring for us again to make it 4-2 on aggregate, before Jardiel decided to take control of the game, scoring our second before River pulled it back to 2-2 on the night, but Jardiel completed his hat-trick with 2 quick goals around the hour mark to make it 4-2 on the night, 7-3 on aggregate, and demonstrate just how far we've come since this time last year. The semi-final saw us drawn against another Argentinian team, this time Racing Club, with us once again at home in the first leg. And what a nervy first leg it was. Racing Club took the lead just before half-time for a Khumalo own goal, before scoring an own goal of their own on 73 minutes for our equaliser. They showed absolutely no attacking ambition for the entire match and looked like they'd get the draw they came for until homegrown boy Nathan Fernandez, who's been with Gremio for over 10 seasons, scored an 89th minute winner to give us a slender lead going into the second leg. I expected Racing Club to show a bit more attacking ambition in the second leg, but once again they seemed content to keep men behind the ball and tried to cancel us out, made even worse by them taking the lead on 21 minutes, drawing the tie level on aggregate. But Jardiel equalised 5 minutes later, and that's how it stayed until they finally realised they were behind late on and tried to do some attacks, at which point we took advantage of finally having some space to play in with an 87th minute goal for Luis Suarez, not that one, and a 95th minute cherry on top from Rosimir, and that was his 45th goal of the season. I know we play a lot of matches in Brazil, but our top 4 scorers at this point, with the season not even over, have 45, 40, 32 and 24 goals respectively. we're quite good at scoring goals. And that goal scoring form led us to the league title with 2 games to spare, with us 11 points clear and having scored over 100 goals in the competition. This was only Gremio's 3rd league title in their history and the first since the mid-90s, i.e. before I was even born. Having already won the state championship and made it to the final of the Brazilian Cup, the board and fans were all pretty pleased with how things were going, but we still had one more big day out, the Copa Libertadores final against fellow Brazilian side Palmeiras, who'd finished way behind us in the league, but did beat us 2-0 on the final day of the season. Still 0-0 at half-time, with us losing our playmaker Breno Biden to injury after half an hour. Neither team were really creating anything, and it wasn't until the 59th minute when the deadlock was broken by an own goal from Palmeiras winger Luis Guilherme to put us 1-0 up. And that was clearly the boost we needed, because we immediately scored again, this time from a good old shenanigans free kick, and that was that. Game over. Palmeiras became increasingly frustrated and just started kicking our players and accumulating yellow cards. But it didn't matter, because we'd won the Copa Libertadores for only the 4th time in Gremio's history, which is of course also the completion of part 4 of my Pentagon challenge. Usually at this point I ask you where you think I'll end up next, but this time we already know. We've already won the Champions League in Africa, Asia, North America and South America, so the next step has to be Europe. There aren't any massive jobs available in the major leagues in Europe right now, although Valencia and Bayer Leverkusen are both tempting, although maybe below the level of my now 5-star reputation manager. So let me know down in the comments which country and club you think we should aim for in Europe, and make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the final part this time next week. Thanks for watching, folks.